I am Rabbi Pinchas Landis, Director of Partners Cleveland. Good evening. On behalf of Partners in Torah of Cleveland, I would like to welcome all of our friends from around the world who are joining us for this exciting event. I would also like to thank our esteemed guests that we have with us tonight. His Excellency, Yousef Otaiba, the United Arab Emirates Ambassador to the United States of America, and Malcolm Hoenlein, the Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. I would like to thank you too for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us tonight in an evening that I know is going to inspire each and every single one of us as we join together for the program, Pillars of Faith, Building a Better World. I would also like to thank our amazing volunteers for helping us with our 33-hour, $300,000 campaign. We couldn't do it without you. And I encourage everybody watching tonight to take a moment, take the link from this program, and send it off to 5 people. Because the success of this program and the success of our campaign is going to be dependent on you helping us to get the message out there. And from the bottom of our hearts, we appreciate it. We are now in a time period known as Sfiras HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, which counts the days from our emancipation from Egypt, which happened just a month ago, until the Jews stood at Mount Sinai and received the Torah from the Almighty, which will happen in 3 weeks' time. At its core, it's a time of great jubilation, a time of great spiritual growth, of us going from the depths of being a downtrodden people to becoming a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. A millennium and a half after these events, roughly 2,000 years ago, something changed. Something tragic happened. Something that on paper could have, would have, and should have wiped the Jewish people off the face of the planet. And I'm referring to the attempted genocide of the Jewish people at the hands of the Romans. We fought a total of 3 bloody wars over the course of 70 years with our Roman foes, culminating in the Bar Kokhba revolts. Now, if the destruction of our Holy Temple, the slaughter of nearly 1 million Jews, and another 1 million Jews sold into slavery in the Roman Empire was not enough, the seeming death blow to the Jewish people happened after all of these wars. What happened then? The Great Academy of Rebbe Akiva, which was 24,000 students strong, during these days of the counting of the Omer, was exterminated. Either as a result of the war or an epidemic, exterminated. And after 7 decades of bloody battle, these 24,000 students represented the remnant. They represented the last gasp of Jewish scholarship in the world. And with their annihilation, the total corpus of Jewish scholarship was wiped out in the world. And our sages tell us that at that point in world history, the world laid desolate. And due to this desolation, these times remain as a time of mourning until this very day. Desolation is a strong word. Now, why is this the word that our sages choose to use to describe the annihilation of 24,000 students of Torah? The Mishnah in Pirkei Avos teaches us, Al Shlosha Devarim Ha'olam Hamed, that the world stands on 3 things: Al HaTorah, V'al Ha'avoda, V'al Gemilus Chasadim. On Torah, on service of the Almighty, and on acts of kindness. Imagine a 3-legged stool. The stool is held up by each and every one of those legs. And each and every single one of those 3 legs is integral to this stool standing upright. Now, what happens if you take away one of those legs? We all know. The stool will come tumbling down to the ground. In the year 135, one of the 3 pillars that holds up the world was removed, causing the world to topple over in a state of desolation. And in many ways, this is the story of the 2,000 years of Jewish history since then. I mean, how desolate did the world look in the 13th century after all of the Crusades, which saw the loss of tens of thousands of Jewish people? And culminated with King Louis IX burning 24 cartloads of the Talmud and other holy Jewish texts in the courtyard outside of Notre Dame in France, earning him the title St. Louis. And how desolate did the world look in the 15th century, when the golden age of Spain was extinguished forever, with the forced conversion, annihilation, and forced expulsion of Spanish Jewry? And how desolate did the world look in the 17th century after the revolts of Bogdan Khmelnytsky and his Cossacks, which saw the death of anywhere from 100,000 to 250,000 of our Jewish brothers and sisters? And the one that's still all too fresh in all of our minds, how desolate was the world after the Holocaust and the Nazis, Yamach Shemo, martyred 1/3 of the Jewish people in the world at that time. This list, as depressing as it is in no way exhaustive. With all these time periods of desolation, how in the world are we still here as a people? And the answer lies also in the life and times of Rebbe Akiva. What did Rebbe Akiva do after that time period of desolation, when his entire academy, 24,000 students that he had worked so hard to build up, so hard to teach, what happened when they were all gone? And what was the atmosphere in the world at that time? The Romans had figured out at this point the secret to the existence of the Jewish people, the lifeline of our nation, and that is the study of Torah. So the Romans, on pain of death, made it illegal to both study and teach Torah. So what did Rebbe Akiva do? Did he just retire to the French Riviera? Did he just say, okay, I gave it a try, it didn't work out so well, I'm done? No. Our sages tell us he took 5 students, and in hiding, he taught the entirety of the knowledge of the Jewish people, everything he knew about our Holy Torah. He taught in the remaining days of his life to these 5 students. An act that in the end cost him his life, because when he was caught by the Romans, he was brutally assassinated. And it is through these 5 students that the Torah lives on today. In every generation, we had the proverbial students of Rebbe Akiva to build us back up after time periods of desolation. Like a phoenix, we always rose from the ashes. In the 13th century, it was Nachmanides, Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, and Rabbeinu Yonah. In the 15th century, it was Rav Yitzchak Luria, Rav Moshe Cordovera, Rav Yousef Cairo, and Rav Moshe Isserles. In the 18th century, it was Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Vilna Gaon, and the Baal Shem Tov. And in the 20th century, it was the likes of Rav Yaakov Yitzchak Ruderman, Rav Aaron Cutler, and Rav Chaim Mordechai Katz, who shook off the ashes of the Holocaust and came over to this country to build great institutions of Torah learning right here on American soil. And it is on the shoulders of these great men and their holy Rebbetzins that we stand today. The study of Torah has been the lifeline of the Jewish people since that fateful day 3,334 years ago when we stood at the foot at Mount Sinai. It has taught us how to live. It has taught us how to treat one another. It has taught us how to connect spiritually. It has taught us how to take care of the poor. It has taught us how to best enjoy the world. And above all, it has taught us the secrets to our success, the longevity of the Jewish people. And it is quite simply the reason that we are here today. At Partners Cleveland, we have one mandate, and that is to give every single Jew the opportunity to plug into our 3,300-year-old lifeline. We do this through tailor-made one-on-one learning opportunities, through innovative digital programmings, through videos, through podcasts, and God willing, once again, when it is safe to do so, through in-person programming. If you are not yet plugged in, if you don't set aside some time, daily, weekly, monthly, to study Torah, now's your chance. Go to www.torahcleveland.com. And if you want a tailor-made learning opportunity for yourself, click on Learn with Us, fill out the form, and we'll match you up with your very own study partner to be your mentor at Partners in Torah. And if you're looking for something else, check out all of our digital programming, our videos, our podcasts, our ongoing weekly series. And if you have the capacity to give to another Jew, because you have a strong basis in Torah knowledge, because you had the opportunity to study for years before tonight, then take 30 minutes out of your week and help another Jew to connect to our lifeline, to the very thing that has kept us here until this very day. And I want all of you to seize the opportunity today to help us bring Torah learning to every single Jew in Cleveland and now quite far beyond. Today is our campaign that will support us for the coming year. In the next 33 hours, we will be raising $300,000, and it will help us to continue to have a robust set of digital programmings to offer to anyone out there who wants to learn with us, as well as, when it's safe to do so, get us back to in-person programming. I hope that you will help us today. I hope that you will help us to make this campaign a success. And I hope that you will help us to make it possible for every single Jew to discover, to reinforce, or to establish their own link in the chain that takes us all the way back to Mount Sinai. I thank you so much for your attention.
I grew up in Long Island, New York, came to Cleveland 12 years ago to attend Case Western Reserve University. Been in Cleveland the last 12 years. I currently live in Ohio City, but am actually moving to the east side this week.
I was born and raised in Cleveland, and my father was born and raised in Cleveland.
Actually, a friend told me about Partners in Torah. You know, I've been getting more into Judaism and studying over the last year or so. And a friend thought it would be a good program for me, told me about Rabbi Landis and about the Partners in Torah program. So I reached out and found information about it online and signed up online.
Two ways I got involved in Partners in Torah. Number one is I have a study partner every night from 9 to 10, and he was involved every Tuesday in Partners in Torah, and sometimes he would come late on Tuesdays because of Partners in Torah. And then the other way is that the Landises hired me to run an event, and I got to see firsthand what Partners in Torah was all about. And at that point, I said to myself, I think I want to be part of this.
He said, I won't give it away, but he said, I'm turning a certain age this year. When you turn this age, you're responsible for teaching and getting involved as a teacher. And I was turning a certain age too, and I thought, I'm ready to be a learner this year. So that was the connection. And I remember the first time we connected over the phone, Yousef asked me, well, what do you want to learn? And I said, everything. I want to learn it all.
So yeah, the first interaction was over the phone, obviously, but it was COVID. So there was no Tuesday night learning and a structure and a place and so on.
We had a question of where we would start, and we eventually decided, let's start with the basics, let's start with the weekly Parsha, and it went from there. This is the first time that I've read the Torah, read the Parshas, the weekly Parshas. And so for me, I'm reading it for the first time, and Yousef has done an incredible job, relating things to life and, these timeless lessons. And I think for me, that's been, really helpful and, just interesting and engaging, and gets me asking questions and wanting to learn and know more.
I think the first time we learned face-to-face was in the tent in my shul.
That's right.
And, it was cold outside. We sat under the heater, and welcome to COVID.
Yeah, I really thought it was cool meeting in the tent, meeting outside, kind of guerrilla Judaism and, making it work.
And we discussed what we wanted to learn, and, it was pretty neat. We had a big empty tent, 60 by 40, and lots of lights, lots of heaters, and just the two of us. We've
spent the last 6 months learning Torah together, studying the weekly Parshas, but at the same time, I think we've gotten to know each other personally. He asked about my family, I asked about his family, and I think we both have, real genuine interest in of each other and our family, our respective families. And, I think it's just a great opportunity to build a relationship with somebody. Really, the highlight has just been the consistency of it, looking forward to it, either Tuesday night or Wednesday night, whatever works for our schedule. That consistent process of working together is really meaningful, and it's been really rewarding for me over the last 6 months.
Every week we come and we take the Parsha, and whether the Parsha is something that looks like it's going to be appropriate to day-to-day life nowadays, or whether it doesn't, there's always something there that, oh, I was thinking about that, or oh, I wanted to ask you about that, or oh, how can you apply that to, and it's so timeless that there's always something to talk about.
If you're like me and you come from a less observant background and you want to, dip your toe in Judaism, for me, it was just a really, welcoming and, open environment where I could meet Yousef, somebody who's been more observant, who has more experience studying Torah and Jewish text.
We've only been learning solo, basically the only two people in the room. It's a whole different experience at a whole nother level when we get into the big conference center at, I think, the Federation, right? And I haven't done that yet. And, hopefully we'll find out soon what it's like to be with, another 100 or however many like-minded individuals, and you have the resources there of people who know a lot more than I do. So, if Jeremy has a question that I don't know the answer to, I don't have to fake it. I can actually go ask somebody.
If somebody came to me and they expressed interest in, getting involved in Partners in Torah, or even more broadly, expressed interest in Judaism, I want to learn more, I want to study, I don't even know where to start. I think that Partners in Torah would be a great place to start.
The Torah tells us to give a tenth of our money, to charity, and it's not just money, it's time too. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a tenth. Nobody's asking you to give 2.4 hours a day to other people, but at least 1 hour a week to give to somebody and not expect anything in return. You're just, it's like giving a donation to a charity box is important as much for you, just like when you give charity to a poor person, God rewards you and you actually gain more than the poor person did. So when you're teaching somebody else Torah, so every word he learns is going to carry on and carry on and carry on and maybe get taught to somebody else. And the amount that you can gain from that is tremendous.
I think there's, a tendency in our society today to, pit different groups against each other. There's my group and there's the other group. And, we come from different environments, different backgrounds, different levels of observance, different educational backgrounds. But I think what binds all Jews together through all time is the Torah. And I think that it's a great way to, it's a great way for me to build my Jewish community, deepen my relationship with Judaism, and anybody that's interested in doing that, I think it's a great way to do it.
There's a famous concept that giving is a lot more gratifying than receiving. And it's even more gratifying when the receiver is appreciative. For those of us who are parents, we give to our kids all the time, even in Torah, even around the Shabbos table. And they don't always, it sinks in, but you don't always see it right away. When you study with a partner, the partner wants to be there. He wants to hear what you're saying. He wants to understand. And it's very gratifying to be able to take stuff that I just took for granted that I knew all these years and give it over to somebody and watch him appreciate it.
It can be foreign, it can feel overwhelming, it's a lot of information, you can feel, way behind the 8 ball. But I would say, the key to really doing anything and growing is to get started, right? For me, this has been an investment. We meet for an hour a week, and aside from that, I just started by reading the weekly parshas. And you can start small and grow from there, take one step at a time. And I think that it's good for everyone from, whatever your background is, to come together, meet people from other backgrounds, and do something positive and timeless, and that is, revolves around what makes us Jews, and that's the Torah.
Partners in Torah of Cleveland welcomes you to tonight's virtual event, Pillars of Faith, Building a Better World. Joining us for this exciting program are honored guests, His Excellency Yousef Al Otaiba, United Arab Emirates Ambassador to the United States of America, and Mr. Malcolm Hoenlein, Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. In just a few moments, Rabbi Pinchas Landis, Director of Partners Cleveland, will interview these two illustrious icons who have spent decades working towards sustainable peace in the Middle East. Tonight, they will share their wisdom and insight with us in making peace a reality during this epic virtual event. We'd like to thank the host committee, our volunteers, and of course our donors who have made tonight possible. And now, without any further ado, Pillars of Faith, Building a Better World.
American and Israel share the belief in the biblical injunction that God instructed Abraham to choose life so that he and future generations will live.
The character of our people and of our leadership is deeply rooted in the unity at home, compassion for others, and openness in minds, market, and faith.
It is in this tradition that we seek to help others, not to dominate or exploit, to share the blessings, to strengthen, to allow them and us the choices of life, so that our children and theirs can be safe and live fulfilling lives.
We see the next phase of our progress anchored in a revival of the region. You see, we in the UAE entirely reject the notion that we are doomed to perpetual conflict in the Middle East.
Strengthening the bonds between our two great countries, forging unbreakable ties as the United States and Israel have come ever closer together in the common front on the war against global terror, against those who seek to impose their extremist ideology and deny the legitimacy of Christianity, Judaism, and even of Islam that does not conform to their radical beliefs.
We believe there is enough room in geography, theology, and economy for everyone. But first, like-minded people and countries, such as the UAE and the US, must meet the immediate challenge of extremism and aggression in the region.
Today, our friends who stand with Israel, elected officials, ministers, citizens of all races and of every national origin, these are the incarnation of those courageous and moral voices of the past. They are the righteous Gentiles of today, and we are grateful to them.
The UAE is the promise of a new Middle East, a safe haven of stability, opportunity, and tolerance in the most difficult of neighborhoods.
The fear, the love of God, enables and ennobles the spirit to stand for justice and morality even in the face of danger, let alone public opinion or political correctness.
It's a path guided by a phrase repeated by Muslims all around the world every single day. In the name of God, the most merciful and most compassionate.
It is wonderful to be able to come together tonight to celebrate our recommitment to choose life for us, for our children, and all future generations.
That's the Islam that I know. Respect, inclusion, and peace. Those are the true tenets of Islam.
We all have come to recognize that the vital decisions we are making these days will be choices of life for us, for our children, and our grandchildren. The decisions will not affect us for years. They will affect us for decades and generations.
I truly believe that a new narrative of openness, opportunity, and optimism is possible. And when I look ahead in the region, I see more Rhodes Scholars and fewer terrorist recruits. I see more missions to Mars and fewer ballistic missiles. I see more women leaders and fewer jihadi Jains, and more online startups and fewer extremist websites. An Islam of peace and inclusion, not one of extremes and exclusion.
The United States and Israel standing together, strengthening each other, upholding our common values and tradition, will ultimately win the day.
In the UAE, this is our way forward. A better way that the men and women in both of our militaries are risking their lives every day to protect and to advance. And whether it's on the battlefield or at the negotiating table, I promise you that the UAE is ready to lead with confidence, knowing that the US is our partner.
Ambassador and Mr. Hoenlein, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's really a pleasure to have this time, and I really, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate it. I want to start off with hearing a little bit about how each of you got to where you are today. What from your background led you into the leadership position for your respective community that you are in today? Can you give us that insight? We'll start with Mr. Hoenlein, and then we'll hear from the ambassador.
First of all, thank you for this opportunity, and especially to be with my friend, the ambassador, who has played such a critical role in advancing the Abraham Accords and in building ties to the community here. I mean, he is singularly responsible for much of the progress that has been made and deserves to be recognized. My parents came from Germany. My grandparents were all killed during the war. Much of my family was. And I think that that had a profound impact. And as I studied history, even as a very young person, even before my bar mitzvah, I got involved politically because I believe that until you have control over your own fate or you live at the sufferance of others, you can never be safe. And so I got involved, but I have to say honestly that it wasn't a matter of choice, that everything happened to me. I never looked for a job in my life. Every opportunity just presented itself, and thank God I was able to take advantage of those opportunities. But from early on, from my college days, I developed friendships with Arabs, with Muslims. We have campaigned for the Yazidis, for the Maronite Christians in Lebanon, for the Kurds, for other groups. But I believed that we could come together, that there was much more binding us than separating us. And in early as 1966, I actually traveled to Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, to try to find a solution to the Palestinian refugee issue, which I felt was a block to better relations, because there was so much that we shared, both historically and in other ways. And I was privileged to have had the opportunity then over the years to translate that commitment into both on-the-ground presence and building ties and bridges. More than 25 years ago, I paid the first visit to the Gulf, and many people were very questioning and skeptical, but thank God it developed. But I believe that you have to be active, you have to be proactive, and there are places where you can't have good relations, but only if you put it to the test. And in most cases, human beings can find common ground.
So, Mr. Hoenlein, it seems like you really feel that you were groomed for your position at the head of the Conference of Presidents of American Jewish Organizations, and that just left you in a situation where you're able to help out the whole community, and especially help us to get to these monumental days with our cousins in the Middle East.
I believe that there was another force at work. Don't take the credit for myself. And I think that you always have to look at the bigger picture. When we're looking at the interests, you can't look at just an narrow perspective. I think the ambassador has done that. I think now many Arab leaders have, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to discuss that.
Mr. Ambassador, what from your background led you into this position to leave your home, go halfway across the world, live with us crazy Americans? What from your background led you into this position that you're in today? Can you give us a little bit of a personal history and tell us how you got to where you are?
All right. First, thank you for having me. Malcolm, it's a pleasure to be with you once again. I think the audience should know that Malcolm and I have been friends for many, many years, way before the Abraham Accords. In fact, it's friendships like that, actually, that probably helped create the environment for the Abraham Accords, where you just create relationships and invest in these relationships, and you never know what comes out. And here we are, many years later with an outcome that was better for everyone in the region at the end of the day. I have no idea how I ended up here. I have no idea how I ended up as a diplomat representing a country from the region to arguably one of the most important partners in our relationships, the United States. All I know is that when I was young, my father was in government. And, he would take me on these official government trips when I was 14, 15, 16 years old. And I would see kind of the impact of officials making decisions that impact an entire country or an entire society. My father was a minister of petroleum, the equivalent of the Secretary of Energy. So I would go to OPEC conferences at 15 years old, and I was probably the only 15-year-old who thought going to an OPEC conference on his summer vacation was a cool thing. I would go back and tell my friends, and they all laugh at me. Some of them would go to events and concerts and movies, and I'm here putting on a suit and tie and going to an OPEC conference that I understand very little about. But what I remember was I was inspired and impressed by how individuals can make decisions that impact so many people and impact an entire country or entire economy. And so I thought serving in government was a noble thing, and it's something I looked up to because I saw it in such a positive light when I was young. So I knew I wanted to go into government, just had no idea what form, what type, what specialty. So I studied international relations. I came to college in the United States. I went back and came back and did my master's and ultimately started working for the government back in 2000. And because of my experience with the United States, I was largely tasked with the US UAE file, and it just kept growing. It just kept growing, and I became sort of largely working on international affairs in general, international relations. And then in 2008, after 8 years in government in Abu Dhabi, I was sent here. By the way, funny story, I actually tried to talk my boss out of coming here. I didn't want to, I wasn't too excited about this job, but because I didn't know what the job was. I got, used to what I was doing. I was comfortable and I didn't want to leave. So I was very enthusiastically encouraged to take the job, which means there was no alternative. You're going to take this job. So here I am almost 13 years later. And I think if you just measure kind of the US-UAE relationship over the past 20 years, I think you would find that if it was a stock, it would be a pretty, steep, gradual increase over the last 20 years. And that's something we're very, very proud of.
Mr. Ambassador, I can't blame you, because I think if I had a choice between Washington, D.C. or Abu Dhabi or Dubai, I think I would be with you on that one. So don't blame you for that one at all.
This is our third decade of these annual visits and have grown each year. We have a record number of people covering almost all of the member organizations of the conference. And I think it's a tribute to the American Jewish community and to the leadership that they come together across the whole spectrum of religious, ideological, political points of view, spend these days together, learning together, even though they hear very different points of view from the whole spectrum. They understand that we have an overriding responsibility, which is to learn to be able to become the best advocates for Israel when we go home. So we met, as I said, at the highest level, including Mohammed Alisa and the top government officials, in very open and I think meaningful discussions, and makes us optimistic about the possibilities for the future. It's not automatic, we know that, but we have visited over the past 25 years many Arab countries. We were the first to visit in some instances, opening the way for Israeli officials to come. We do not see ourselves as representatives of Israel. We are an American Jewish community. We try to play a constructive bridge-building role, and I think that happened this past week. The fact that we had kosher meals for 4 days, that we had a minyan there, and we heard about the intentions to build and to make change. It's a necessity. It's not just an opportunity, and it should be a priority across the board, from Morocco to the Persian Gulf, and many Muslim countries beyond the Arab countries who are anxious to have relations, who deal with us because it's sometimes easier than dealing directly with Israel, but they are moving more and more into quiet relationships and sometimes even open encounters. And that it is the potential to change the region. We began a Mediterranean initiative 10 years ago that we now see in the Cyprus, Greece-Israel relationship, and many other countries coming to us wanting to be part of this. As Arab leaders tell us, Israel drives innovation in the region. And Israel has all the things we need, and we offer much to Israel. So I hope that is a vision that we can fulfill.
So, Mr. Hoenlein, I just want to ask a follow-up on what you said before. You mentioned how some time ago, long before the Abraham Accords were even a figment of our imagination, you had already been involved in many delegations between the UAE, Israel, America, other countries of the Middle East, other Arab countries. Can you describe what it was like to be part of some of those delegations over the years and some shining moments from those delegations?
Sure. Well, they were very exciting because it was sort of a pioneering effort, and the responsiveness on the part of the interlocutors of the various countries, despite the tensions that existed and continued to periodically. It wasn't the kind of atmosphere that exists today, but we saw how much what the potential was, what the prospects were, what the opportunities would be. And I reached out to Muslim countries also, the Central Asian countries, President Aliyev of Azerbaijan, to Kazakhstan, to Uzbekistan, and we translated real deals when 13 Iranian Jews were arrested, and I had the privilege to coordinate the effort around the world to get them out. Many Arab and Muslim countries did remarkable things. Kings and princes and leaders wrote letters, put the Iranians on notice that they would break relations if these 13 Jews were harmed. And for the first time, all 13, 3 of whom were marked for death sentences, were actually released and home with their families, today free. And that was an important test to me about putting yourself on the line. You know, that I came to New York to start the Soviet Jewry conference in New York and to organize the big demonstrations. And in that, we built coalitions. We were able to reach out across the board, across every racial, religious, ethnic background, that people came out. And if somebody takes the lead, I saw that others are ready to do the right thing, to stand up. And the result is clear, with more than 1 million Russian Jews having gotten out, but they make glasnost and perestroika possible. Like the ambassador, I studied international relations so that I would try to have the best credentials to do what I know I wanted to do, which was exactly what I was privileged in the end to do until now. And the opening of the opportunities, you know, it started with King Hussein in Jordan early on, with Mubarak, with others, not always the most friendly, but who were open. And when they found a genuine interlocutor, I saw the opportunities that presented themselves. The previous king of Morocco, similarly. And now the next generation that you see in these countries, MBS and MBZ, the President Sisi, the remarkable changes that they have helped bring about. And we could see, you know, the principle in the Talmud, Haroes and Nolad, that you see the opportunity, potential. That's what we saw there in these opportunities. And, you know, the first visit to the UAE, we started the what became now Kosher Arabia. And I saw an opening just recently of a new facility with Emirates Air. I mean, things that nobody could have believed, the Abrahamic house, the synagogues, the other facilities. But the truth is that there's a long history. You know, Jews lived in Hormuz, on the island of Hormuz, hundreds of years ago in the Middle Ages. Hundreds of families lived there, and they just recently found a trace of one. So, and I say this because there's a context that is lost, that people don't know the background. And now we see these countries rebuilding, Morocco, Egypt, others, rehabilitating the Jewish heritage in these countries, reestablishing what from ties of the past. And many of them were very positive and wonderful relationships that unfortunately often political leaders, religious leaders, other things instilled hate and division, where there should have been common efforts, and everybody pays a price for it. So my experience was that there was a great openness, and, you know, that you have to sublimate yourself to understand the greater good and the greater goals that can be achieved.
I love that point you just made about the warm history that the Jewish people and the people of the different Arab communities, Arab countries, the Muslim world, how it was, you know, what we're seeing now is not how it always was. You know, as I often teach, Ishmael was a Jewish name for a long time in Jewish history. You know, the ambassador is named after Yousef HaTzadik, the great Joseph from the Jewish part of the Bible. So, and that's not a coincidence. There's definitely a history here. We've had some bumps over the past century or two, but you know, I love how you brought to light that the history is a history of cousins, which we truly are, and that's why I know personally, I don't know who picked the name Abraham Accords, but I think that's such a beautiful name for what it was, because it really brings out that point that we are cousins. So thank you for highlighting that, Mr. Hoenlein.
After decades of division and conflict, September 15th, 2020 was a historic day for peace. President Donald J. Trump brokered the signing of 2 peace agreements between Israel and Arab states, the first in more than a quarter century. They were between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and between Israel and Bahrain. These 2 agreements normalized relations between these nations, establishing regional peace built upon shared interests, mutual respect, and friendship. 5 weeks later, the United States brokered yet a 3rd peace agreement, this time between Israel and Sudan. Collectively known as the Abraham Accords, through these agreements, each country recognizes the importance of strengthening peace in the Middle East and around the world through mutual understanding and respect for human dignity and freedom. They also promote interfaith and intercultural dialogue in order to advance a culture of peace through cooperation. They acknowledge that the best way to address challenges is through cooperation and dialogue, and the importance of tolerance and respect for every person. And finally, they call for an end to radicalization and conflict by supporting science, art, medicine, and commerce to inspire humankind, maximize human potential, and bring nations closer together. Through the Abraham Accords, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Sudan are setting aside their differences and pursuing long-lasting peace in the region. They are now establishing embassies, exchanging ambassadors, and cooperating as partners on a variety of issues, including tourism, trade, healthcare, and security. The Abraham Accords are a monumental step in creating more opportunities for establishing peace, prosperity, and stability in the Middle East. I'm Christian James, and this is the U.S. policy on the Abraham Accords, explained.
So, Ambassador, how did you feel when this was going on as a result from the work that you had done? What were your feelings at that time?
We've always had strong relationships with Jewish organizations. I remember even before Malcolm's delegation in 2020, we had visitors from the Simon Wiesenthal Center and AJC and ADL almost as far back as 20 years ago. And so we have been incredibly proud and totally unapologetic about demonstrating and publicizing our values of tolerance, acceptance, inclusion. We've become even more vocal in the last couple of years, only because I feel that, our religion has been hijacked and our religion has been basically overrun by extremist rhetoric. So it's very important for those of us who are proud of the way they were raised and the way they were explained to their religion. I think it's very important for us to be vocal about it. We have to make sure people understand Islam the right way, make sure they see Islam the right way, the way we were raised, the way we were taught, that Islam is accepting, Islam is respectful. And so, this was just part of who we are. It wasn't a PR stunt. It wasn't a spin. These are groups that on most issues, we come to some type of commonality and agreement on. And so, like Malcolm and others, we've been engaged with them for many, many years.
And Mr. Hoenlein, what about you? For those of us who weren't privileged to be on the inside all these years, and when we start to hear about this, again, it seems shocking we don't know the backstory. How did you feel at that time?
I had visited the UAE twice before the big delegation went, and we did it covertly because we wanted to build a relationship of trust. And that is what I really learned is key to any relationship, and it's what enabled me to have wonderful relationships with every president of the United States, really confidential, often very intimate relationships with presidents, with leaders around the world, because they know we don't leak, we don't exploit, we're not interested in the press coverage, we're interested in the results. And too often, visits and everything just became an opportunity for grandstanding. And it was an understanding I reached with the ambassador, but it was one that we had before as well. If our host decided to release it when we meant to see President of Egypt, and the next moment we left the room and we told everybody, this is private, it's off the record, and he had it on his Facebook page. They're entitled to do that. But the building of relationships of trust, when we went the first times, I visited the Jewish community, the very small community in Dubai, and they had a synagogue. It was not marked, but it was allowed, it was officially allowed to function, but it was clandestine essentially. And now you have this very open recognition of the community. It's included in official documents. Officials have engaged with them. You have the pictures of Torah scrolls being given to leaders, and we should include Bahrain too in our discussion, and of course Sudan, others that have joined. There's something very important to note, that when we see anti-Semitism increasing in Europe, in the United States, around the world, there is one exception. And that is in these Arab countries that have joined the Abraham Accords, who have changed their textbooks, the UAE, even Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Morocco, others have taken dramatic steps to change the education to hate, to restore Jewish cemeteries, Jewish institutions, to rediscover the Jewish past and the linkages that a process of the 33 mummies, the Golden City in Egypt just recently, and they're reading texts about Islam, Judaism, and Christianity and the common bonds. People like Muhammad Alisa of the Muslim World League in the UAE has done dramatic things, and the Holocaust ceremony in the UAE and in Bahrain and elsewhere, Morocco. These are dramatic changes, and that's how you're going to build a different future, is to educate the youth, not to hate, but to find the commonalities, to see how we build together. Everybody benefits from it. And I think that the change was that what was seen as a quiet visit is now open, that the relationships are burgeoning. The opportunities I think everybody sees today are really limitless. And everybody will benefit. It will improve security, tourism, economics, everything, which also increases the lot of the people in those countries who see that they have a vested interest in this.
I think it's important for us to try really hard, because this doesn't happen often, is to try to separate foreign policy from our values of tolerance, moderation, and acceptance. Those are two very distinct things, and I think they frequently get blurred between each other, and that's where confusion occurs.
الوسام العلوي من درجة ضابط كبير Monsieur Malcolm Hoenlein, vice-président exécutif de la Conférence des grandes organisations juives américaines.
Mr. Hoenlein, at that moment when you received that award from the King of Morocco, what were your feelings at that moment?
Honestly, it was overwhelming, because I did not anticipate that 5,000 people would be there. The Muslim Brotherhood was there. They were members of the cabinet. And the king went out of his way to highlight my participation. And, I wrote him before, and I said that I wear a yarmulke normally, but if it creates a problem, you should let me know. And his answer to me is, you do what you do. And he repeated it again that day when I saw who was there, and it was televised nationally. And the next day, the Muslim Brotherhood said that the king honored a Zionist murderer, and the king was very pleased by that. He said, because I felt bad, and he said, no, I knew what they were going to do. It was a very remarkable act on the part of the king, who has done many remarkable things, and a recognition. There were things we had done on behalf of Morocco, humanitarian missions, other things, political things as well, and that he was willing to do that publicly, televised during Ramadan when everybody watches, because it was right before the break of the fast. To me, it was an overwhelming expression of responsibility that I felt, that I was carrying not just me, but all of those before and all those who are watching, and how this could benefit in building longer-term relationships and sending a positive message. And I have to say that it was, the king invited my family to be there, and he went out of his way to say hello to them. It was really a remarkable thing, and I've been privileged to be at all the signings at the White House for the last 40 years and everything else, but this was truly a highlight.
Can you describe for us exactly what the award was for and the background to it, for those who aren't familiar with it?
Well, some of it, but the title is a civilian award. It's the highest civilian award they give. But it was really for the ties that we had built, the relationships we had established, the advocacy. Because I found myself often talking to presidents or secretaries of state, and by the time I finished, I realized that I hadn't spoken about Israel. I've been talking about Arab countries and the need to build stronger ties and strengthen those who were trying to move in the right direction. And we also had helped after a crisis in Morocco, a humanitarian crisis, to bring aid and assistance there and to foster ties with others and other countries actually as well. So we always look at our responsibility in the broadest possible sense of building ties with Israel and the United States, but also how you impact the region. And now I strongly believe the Mediterranean Initiative, together with the Gulf, can change the world. We can rewrite the map and isolate the extremists and terrorists, which UAE is doing so much for, which other countries are really working all the time to accomplish.
Amen.
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 Inspired by faith and a hope for peace, the world's youngest Jewish community.
It's fair to say that for many of the people I was meeting, I was the first Jewish person they met, and certainly the first observant Jew. I never felt unsafe, and I never felt unwelcomed.
In the most unlikely of places, the Arabian Peninsula. A gift, the Torah, given to the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, a leader of the UAE.
The gesture to dedicate a new Torah scroll to an Arab ruler is unimaginable.
Amen.
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 Follows the journey of this unique and historic gift. From one workshop in Israel, to another in Brooklyn, to a palace in the United Arab Emirates. A Torah scroll dedicated to the memory of the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, the pioneering founder of a country that is unique in the Middle East.
The UAE is an oasis of enlightenment. It is an oasis of tolerance.
The United Arab Emirates is made up of 7 small states on the Arabian Peninsula, a Muslim nation with a critical message for the world.
The country was built on 2 main pillars, which are tolerance and acceptance. They are a part of who we are. They are in our DNA fabric.
Judaism, Islam, a roadmap to religious pluralism and peace.
I'm under no illusions that this gift will solve complicated geopolitical problems. What this gift does do is it gives us material for creating a new narrative in the Middle East.
Amen.
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 Tells the story of a little-known sanctuary of religious tolerance in the Middle East, and the untold story of a tiny Jewish community, and a Torah scroll that is both a seed and harvest of an historic movement for peace.
I can only imagine that 10, 20 years from now, when we look back at it, we'll say this was an important moment.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.